in the media, there hasn't been a lot of context about which industries are buying which politicians.
A CNN guest was quickly rushed off the air after he criticized corporate media coverage. Now, this is going to be the show Reliable Sources on CNN, Brian Stelter's show, which is supposed to be about media criticism, and he does give a little space for that here. But look how quickly he ends this conversation with guest journalist David Sirota, founder of The Daily Poster.
David Sirota. He's the founder of the Daily Poster. He's also out with a really interesting new podcast called Meltdown that we'll talk about in a minute. David, good to see you.
Good to see you.
You were writing speeches for Bernie Sanders in 2020, so we know what side of the aisle you're on or what side of the Democratic fight you're on. I would love to hear your number one critique of how Biden and his social safety net bill and how this battle to get it through Congress, how it's being covered in the press. Your number one critique.
My number one critique is that there hasn't been a lot of following of the money. That if you pay attention to the conversation in the media, there hasn't been a lot of context about which industries are buying which politicians. You see the parties fighting with each other, you see the pieces of the Democratic coalition fighting with each other, but removed from much of the story is the fact that the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry is pumping a lot of money into this. The pharmaceutical industry is pumping a lot of money into this. Many of the members of Congress who are trying to kill Democrats' promised prescription drug plan, they have taken a huge amount of money from the pharmaceutical industry. So writing the money behind the bill out of the story of the bill is a huge problem, and it doesn't give viewers and readers the context that they need.
This relates to your new series, Meltdown, which you and Alex Gibney have done. I think it's important because it gives historical context to the last 12 years. You go back to the financial crisis and you say, a lot of what's happened since Trump's election, what's happened, it all is because of the financial meltdown 2008 and 2009. So how can we infuse more historical context into today's news coverage?
Well, look, I think when you take the reconciliation bill and then that's in Congress right now, there's this baked-in idea that the Democrats have to basically pare back their promised agenda in order to try to win the midterm elections. But of course, if you go back to the 2009-2010 era, which we do in our podcast Meltdown, you take a look at the Democrats doing the same thing. At that point, it was on behalf of their Wall Street donors. They pared back help for regular people. They did a huge bailout for big bankers who had created the problem unto itself. And there was a huge backlash. The Democrats ended up getting shellacked. Those were the words of Barack Obama. They got shellacked in the elections in part because there was a lot of disillusionment from voters who said, look, we were promised help, we didn't get help. So if you fast forward to today, a lot of the media coverage presumes that if Democrats need to pare back their agenda in order to appease so-called moderate voters. But in fact, the historical context says the exact opposite.
So we have to infuse what we know from history into the daily coverage. And what we need is a little bit less of the kind of the hysterical minute by minute and a little bit more of the broader story here. Where can we find Meltdown, by the way?
It's on Audible right now.
There we go. Thanks for coming on the program. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So for those counting, that was 3 minutes and 4 seconds. That was the entire appearance. 3 minutes and 4 seconds. And Brian Stelter only asked him 2 questions. I'm not sure I've ever seen an appearance this fast. I mean, they really rushed him off the air. Now, I always try to be as objective as possible. So to be fair, Brian Stelter did ask him a good question. He wanted David Sirota's opinion on what the media is doing wrong. David Sirota gave him that answer. But there was no further discussion there. There was no getting deep into specifics. There was no historicizing in terms of using what happened in the past with the financial crisis and the failure of the Democratic Party and now applying that to today and a further discussion about that. This was a very quick appearance, and you can tell they didn't want to talk too much about this. This is an hour-long show, a show about media criticism, where they almost never discuss the influence of corporations and big money and how that molds media coverage. But you get 3 minutes maybe once a year on this topic, which should be the number one topic every week. And for context here, Mehdi Hasan, who hosts a show largely online for MSNBC, had on David Sirota and the co-producer of their new podcast, Meltdown, had him on for an 11-minute conversation. So 11 minutes on a show that is not about media criticism versus 3 minutes on a show, reliable sources on CNN, that is about media criticism. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. That said, it was good to hear David Sirota call this out on air. Maybe in those few minutes inform some viewers who are watching at home. But man, this is the number one issue: corporate influence and big money influence on politics. And it gets so little media coverage, even on CNN's flagship media criticism show.